there was like one small wing that was bluegrassers, and no one would go down there unless you were like, it was this deep, dark thing that you don't want to, it's like, you shouldn't get into that stuff, kid. And so I remember like the first time I was getting into bluegrass, I kind of had to like sort of hide it from them a little bit. It was like this forbidden thing, and I was supposed to keep a secret.
Hey, greetings everyone. Keith Billick here. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast. Happy September and happy back to school or cooler weather or whatever September means to you. I talked a couple episodes about how my September was going to be action-packed, going to Dell Fest and IBMA and teaching at the Great Lakes Music Camp. And lo and behold, due to the reason that we all know, two of those things have been postponed, so my action-packed September is now looking more action-diluted or something like that. So I'm still going to be at IBMA the last week of this month. I will be exhibiting with my good friend Dan Patrick, who hosts the Mandolins and Beer podcast, and we're going to have an exhibit booth, so come say hi. I'll be there all week, and if any of you are down in the Raleigh, North Carolina area, hopefully I will get to run into you in person. So while I am definitely disappointed about the great interviews that I won't be able to do that I had set up for these other events, it is way beyond my control, and I just hope to have better luck next time. Speaking of that, though, I am the luckiest podcast host in the world to have such fantastic supporters of the show here. And one such supporter is Jordan Ream. He is the Patreon supporter of the day. He went to patreon.com/banjopodcast and became a supporter of the show. Jordan's life changed when he saw Sammy Sheeler play at the Romp Festival down in Kentucky. And as fortune would have it, he's now in a band called Kentucky Shine that is performing at this year's Romp Fest. So a real full circle moment. And if my estimations are correct, Romp is happening any day now. So Jordan, I really hope you hear this before your performance, and best of luck to you and your band. And thank you so much for supporting the show. Once again, that website is patreon.com/banjopodcast. If you have been enjoying this show, please consider going to that website and tossing $1 or a few dollars per month my way. And there are benefits to doing that, such as getting to be invited to the monthly video meet and greet with myself and your fellow VIP, very important picker supporters. And actually, I have an announcement for this month's VIP lounge. That is going to take place on Sunday, September 26th at 1 p.m. And did I just say Sunday like the monster truck announcer guy? I think I did, but either way, I hope to see you all at the VIP lounge. It's always a ton of fun. Today's featured guest is the switch-hitting double-threat banjo player Frank Evans, and I refer to him that way because he is truly one of the best that I've seen in terms of playing at a very high level on both three-finger as well as clawhammer styles, and I hope to feature his abilities on both of those throughout this episode. Frank is best known as the banjo player for the Slocan Ramblers, a Canadian bluegrass band, and he just released a duo album with an amazing fiddler named Ben Plotnick, and you'll be hearing a bit of those song clips and hearing him chat about that. If you have been listening for several episodes now, you will recall that I did a trip to Nashville a couple months back to get interviews, and I was really lucky that Frank and Ben's CD release show at the Station Inn was during that week, so I was able to attend that and got to enjoy that show and then do the interview with Frank the following day while it was all fresh in my mind. So I got an up-close and personal look at what Frank is able to do, and I think you'll be just as impressed as I was. One last thing before we get started. Feel free to contact me at pickyfingersbanjopodcast@gmail.com with any feedback on the show, suggestions, or other comments. But let's get started. Here it is, my interview with Frank Evans.
My name is Frank Evans, and I'm from Toronto, Ontario. Not Toronto, but Toronto. And I first got into the banjo when I was about 9 or 10 years old. Both my parents are classical musicians, so I grew up with people, sort of practicing in the house all the time. And they sort of steered me towards music quite early. I started playing piano when I was I started playing flute when I was about 4, and then piano a little bit later. And nothing really took. I had some great teachers, but it just didn't really seem to fit. And then I went to a concert called the Banjo Special that happens every year in Toronto. And it's this concert where they play all these different styles of banjo. So there's an Irish tenor banjo player, and there's a couple clawhammer players, and a bluegrass banjo player. And I just really gravitated towards the clawhammer style. And so there was a guy playing there named Chris Cool, who was he was also the style that really it struck me, but he was also kind of the first in line that I was able to talk to. So it was this weird sort of, weird circumstance. And I talked to him, and he gave lessons, and he was teaching me for a while. And
he lives there too?
He lives in Toronto, yeah, exactly. And so then he eventually told me to go down to Cliff Top, which is the old-time sort of fiddlers convention. It's sort of the big one. It happens in West Virginia every year in August. And that was only about a year after taking lessons with him. And so the first year, actually, my parents took me down.
Remind me how old you are when all this is happening?
I would have been 10 at this point, or 10 or 11, yeah. And they just thought it would be a fun sort of vacation. And so I went down there, and it was amazing because this festival is like, for those of you who've never been to this festival, it's big in, old-time fiddlers convention standards, multiple thousands of people. Yeah. And it's in a fairly small campground, so it's pretty condensed, and so everyone's tent is only a matter of inches away from each other. And so we got there, and it's a bit overwhelming, and then there was the possibility that I might not even see Chris when I was there, because that is totally, you can go there and meet an entirely new community every time you go, and not see the old one that you met the previous year. But it just so happened that right at the very sort of bottom of the hill where we were doing our final loop, we ran into them. And so we got to spend the whole week with Chris, and he sort of, he would shepherd me around and take me to all these jams that I think if I was just on my own, I would have never found myself in. But
now, were you capable enough at that point to actually participate in those jams, or what was going on?
Yeah, yes, I wasn't an amazing banjo player. I could follow along, nothing special. But I think, people often, if they see someone who's that age and they're really into the banjo, you get a few extra points or whatever. Right. So, I was able to play in some jams, and I think I hadn't played in that sort of setting before, like in the full string band instrumentation setting before. So that's like a whole other experience where you get to hear the bass and the guitar, and then some amazing fiddle players, and you get that whole sonic experience. It's that's kind of a game changer too. Then you're like, oh, this is how it's supposed to feel when you play.
Even when you go back and practice on your own, you have that in your mind of what you're working towards, so that you can be a part of this really fun thing that you
absolutely, yeah. And especially those fiddlers conventions, we were just talking about this with someone else, and that there's like this sort of magical energy that happens when you're at those things. And I feel like the whole year is spent chasing that dragon of like how to make it feel like you're, sleep deprived and in the middle of a dusty road playing whatever your favorite fiddle tune is. And there's just really no way to replicate it. So I guess I sort of like got the best experience of what the music is supposed to feel like quite early on.
I feel like I've gotten pretty good at replicating the sleep deprivation part.
Right.
I'm good at that. Maybe any musical talent, not quite as much.
The bad odors,
I can give you some tips on the sleep deprivation. Bad odor, right? Yeah, just don't take a shower for a while. Stay up for 72 hours. Yeah. You're good. Awesome. So you were pretty strictly clawhammer at that point, right?
Yeah. I was aware of bluegrass, and like there was, when you play an instrument like the banjo, I feel like everyone who has any connection to the banjo is sort of like always being like, oh, I have this CD kicking around my house. Like, well, you should take it. You're the one banjo player I know. So I had a bunch of like people who'd give me some bluegrass records and stuff like that. So I was aware of kind of other styles of banjo, but I was really quite into old time at the moment.
Who were some players that, I mean, obviously Chris must have been a huge influence on you, but I know there are, and you're going to probably have to like hold my hand a bit because I know mostly 3-finger style. So the clawhammer stuff, you'll have to educate me a bit too, but I know there are different styles and regional ways of playing clawhammer. Were you exploring that stuff too, or which ones influenced you, do you think?
I wasn't really knowledgeable about like regional styles of playing at that point. I was just kind of playing whatever style sort of I gravitated towards. And of course, Chris was a huge influence. I loved his style of playing. His style was like really clean. He uses his sort of setup on the banjo is pretty much the same setup I still use today. And it's like really high action and really heavy gauge strings, and get a very sort of deep bell-like tone on every string, and as little pick noise as possible, and it's really hard to get that sort of chuck you can get in sort of the round peak style.
So that actually, I might be skipping ahead because I was going to ask about this. The fact that you have really high action might answer it. I see that you play quite often over the fingerboard, which made me a little surprised that you don't have a scooped fingerboard, because it seems like that would be so convenient for you. But is that part of the reason? Is that your high action makes it so that you don't really need it as much? Or what's the deal with that?
Yeah, that's definitely and I mean, I think it's similar in a lot of instruments where the higher the action, for whatever reason, it sort of darkens the instrument a little bit. And yes, it's mostly just sort of a comfort thing. And when you play over the neck, I'll just give it a quick example.
Yeah.
If you were to play over the bridge, and I use a metal finger pick on just sort of to replicate a regular fingernail. A lot of clawhammer banjo players have long fingernails, and that helps. But if you're playing bluegrass as well, then the long fingernails can kind of get in the way of the bluegrass picks. So I use a metal pick backwards, and I just find that over the head of the instrument, it's just kind of a little brash, or it's just little tinny, so you can kind of get away with some of the darker tones over the neck. And then having the high action means that you're not really constantly hitting that fretboard.
Yeah, that's what's impressive about it, especially with the pick. It seems like it's a recipe for maybe a lot of fret pick collisions.
Yes, and you do get it on the first string sometimes. And I try, I work to try and not have it, but when if you're having to play loudly or something like that, it comes out. So yeah, that was kind of the style that really I was, mostly replicating at that time, just because Chris was sort of my teacher, and I, obviously I still love that style. There was a couple other players that I really loved. He would give me some examples of people, but like Kyle Creed was always one of my favorite banjo players. Just his tone is amazing, and like the way that he plays those Galax rolls are just like it's kind of untouchable.
So what is a Galax roll?
Galax roll.
This is how
right.
Elementary I am with all this stuff.
Galax roll coming from Galax, Virginia. I'm really not anyone to talk to about the history of this stuff. I just know it as sort of a technique based thing. But it's a very specific type of roll where you kind of brush through the strings, and there's often like a slide or a hammer-on associated with it. Okay. One of the sort of famous versions of it is Fred Cochran playing this song called "Hop High My Lulu Gal," or he calls it "Roustabout," and you may have heard it. And you have this, and it's really interesting because it's not.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's not like a triplet. It's not. It's kind of this nebulous rhythm that they have that it just kind of fits in right before the bar. It reminds me a lot of like Django style playing, where they have these like brushed downstrokes, and they're not like in this super subdivided rhythm. It's just kind of like this really amazing way of adding tension before that the downbeat of the note, and so
it's like a smeared attack more than a precise rhythm.
Yeah, or like a rock guitar player has often like. That was a terrible example, but there's often like these sort of muted brush strokes that are like, and it really adds this tension before that note. A lot of people, I think, associate it also with sometimes picking up in the fifth string afterwards. So it's like that kind of is very specific to the Galax roll. So there might be even like more strict definitions of what it is. That sort of thing. So it's a little bit out of tune. So yeah, I mean, Kyle Creed was, he does that amazingly. Also, funny enough, when I was first getting into banjo, my brother went to like the Blockbuster CD store in Toronto called HMV and was looking for something banjo related because he knew I was kind of getting interested and I was about to start taking lessons. And this was, again, when I was 9 or 10 or something like that.
He's an older brother,
He's an older brother, yeah. And neither of us knew anything about this music. And he just went to the used folk section at, at HMV, which you would never expect to find anything kind of slightly off the beaten path, and he picked this album by this band player named Walt Koken, who's like still one of my favorite banjo players, and it was his solo record called Banjonique, and I have no idea how it ended up there. It was a brand new copy, hadn't been opened. It wasn't like. Yeah. So it just ended up there.
And it was
somehow.
The one your brother chose.
It was the one that had a picture of the banjo on the front.
Like it took 2 miracles to happen. Yeah. Cool.
And I wore that CD out. It was the soundtrack for a couple of years. Mm-hmm. And he does these amazing things. Like he's quite influential, and he does these. There's a big part of playing clawhammer is these left-hand pull-offs, which is kind of unique to it, where you're not actually. It's not associated with the right hand. It's just independent of the right hand. You just And you can do it with fretted notes as well. So, I mean, one of the tricky things about clawhammer is that just due to the shape of your right hand and how you're playing, it's really hard to get ascending intervals as opposed to descending intervals. Because the only way to sort of subdivide notes is for your thumb to drop down. You can have... But to go back up is actually kind of tricky. Some people do these sort of
cross yourself up, or
whereas it gets a little tricky with bluegrass too. But it's even more difficult with clawhammer. So there's these left-hand pull-offs, and Walt Koken was amazing. He would do these kind of.
I still can't even tell exactly what you're doing. It's a pull-off, but the note is going up.
Yeah,
that
so
make
like
sense.
if I were to just plant my finger on the 5th fret and then I would just use that as my marker and pull off, and you can pull off from anywhere above that, but you get the note.
Oh.
And that way if I was going to ascend, if I wanted to go as opposed to
I get it. Okay.
That sort of thing. So it is a little bit of, like rubbing your stomach and patting your head at the same time. It kind of gets a little confusing because you have to think 2 frets above where you're actually the target note is. Sorry if I'm totally losing everyone here, but
so your right hand is plucking, say, the B string, depending on what tuning you're in, but then you have also a note that you're playing on the high D string, but it's played by just a pull off, pull off without having the string being attacked with your right hand.
Yeah,
it's just
so it's
completely
independent of the right. Yeah, exactly.
It's almost like a 2-hand tapping variation, or a little bit like that. Same concept.
Yeah, and so Walt Koken's amazing. Also, one of the sort of people who's perfected it is Adam Hurt. Like he's amazing. And he's worked really hard on making sure that it doesn't sound like a pull off. That it just sounds, the volume of everything is very consistent. So it's just this really beautiful legato, phrase that he'll be playing as opposed to kind of like this obvious lick that you're trying to pull off. But yeah, so just a couple of people that I have been really influential over the years.
So did you, I take it you eventually got to the point where you were participating a bit more in the clifftop style picking sessions, or maybe you were able to find something closer to you to be involved in, hopefully?
How
did that all play
out? A little
out?
bit older. I went down to clifftop for, I think I went maybe 10 years in a row. Like I was really hooked on it. It was this sort of, it was like my, everything I looked forward to, which is funny as a, 14, 15-year-old. I was so into it. When I was in grade 8, there was a project that you had to do that was like, you'd spent the whole year trying to put together a project on whatever you wanted to do, but it had to be the sort of big culminating project of your middle school. And so the project that I picked was I made a graphic novel on Ed Hammonds, who's like a West Virginian fiddle player. So I was like really deep into it at that point.
So he's a literal superhero now with his own
exactly.
comic book.
Yeah. So so I was really into it, and there was definitely a scene in Toronto to play. It wasn't quite as vibrant, and maybe it's just because being at those fiddlers conventions, it's something magical about it, and it's never going to be the same. But it was also like, going down there was maybe more people my own age who were playing it, and so that was kind of fun. Yeah. And I did a bit of the competitions, which were always fun. I did I got second in there, and I won a couple of the like youth ones and stuff like that. Yeah. So that was awesome. my happy place for sure.
Yeah. That's cool. So when along this way did you start to consider playing bluegrass style? Or is that skipping ahead too much?
No, not at all. I met up with these guys. So I was, it was honestly, I think, sort of trying to play with people closer to my age. I think, I wasn't actually seeking that out, but I think looking back on it, I would have very openly appreciated that. And so I ran into a friend of mine who I was working with at the time, and he was going through music school. There's a jazz college in Toronto called Humber College, and he was a bass player there, and he was playing with these other three guys who were just getting into acoustic music, and they were all jazz people, but they, after finding out about Tony Rice and Norman Blake, they quickly found each other because they were like the only ones in the college who were into that stuff. And they were playing together. And so my friend knew I played the banjo. And so he said, you should come play some tunes with us. And I got there, and it was very clearly like it was bluegrass is what these guys were into. And I didn't have any problem with that. I just didn't really know the repertoire. So I think like week 2, like we sort of set up regular jams or something like that. And week 2, I just went to the store and bought a gold tone bluegrass banjo because it was kind of like, this is clearly, this is the way to play this music.
That's where your opportunity is. So
it's
worth it to invest yourself in that.
Yeah, and when you listen to that kind of music, it doesn't really fit unless you have the bluegrass banjo. Like you can play those songs, you can get by, but it was like I was hearing this music and I really wanted to make it sound like that. So there was like really one path to take.
So you're getting into that music too then. Was it the same stuff as these guys were listening to, the Tony Rice recordings? Or?
It was pretty modern stuff. It was kind of funny because I went from the old time stuff, thinking about it, when I was listening to old time and playing old time, I was listening to mostly like sort of archive recordings and older stuff. I wasn't really listening to contemporary old time bands really. And I think I dove into the other side of bluegrass. Like I was like, oh my God, improvisation is the thing. Like you don't have to follow this exact recording and play exactly this Galax roll in this particular moment. So I think I dove into the other side of stuff, and I got really into Bella Fleck, and I got really into Tony Rice recordings and loved all these Ricky Skaggs instrumental records and stuff. And
how fast were you, or how quickly were you able to pick that up going from clawhammer? Was that a relatively easy transition for you?
It was. It's different than starting from scratch. And I think in my clawhammer playing, I had tried to sort of experiment with the fretboard a little bit more. So I had some basis of it. I also got really into it. Like it was one of those things. I think a lot of people who kind of have this moment in their musical career or whatever, but it was like that was the moment when I was like, oh yeah, I think I can play 6 hours a day, no problem. Like that's not an issue. Whereas now, I struggle to try and find that kind of concentration, but it was just not a problem. I had to fend off people who were saying you shouldn't be doing this, you're going to get arthritis or whatever.
Now, were you still balancing your time between the two styles, or did you kind of dive into that without looking back necessarily? I
kind of dropped the clawhammer. I think I just fully went for the bluegrass stuff. It's so hard. That stuff, I got really into melodic, and as I was saying, the sort of single string things right away. And with that stuff, unless you stay on top of it, you can't really pull it off, And these guys were kind of starting to book gigs, and there was sort of performance tempos that things were expected to be played at, and so unless I really put all my time towards that, I was not going to be able to pull it off.
Man, some of us can't pull that stuff off, even regardless of how much time we might try to put into it. Folks, we are in a golden age of online instrument instruction, and at the top of that world is Peghead Nation. Peghead Nation has streaming video courses in banjo, guitar, mandolin, fiddle, dobro, upright bass, and ukulele, so you can learn bluegrass, old time, and plenty of other styles from some of the most talented players and instructors in all of roots music. Check out the courses they have, and this is just for banjo. You could get beginning or bluegrass banjo with Bill Evans, clawhammer banjo with Evie Layden, Wade Ward style banjo with Bruce Molsky, the banjo according to Danny Barnes, and contemporary bluegrass banjo with Wes Corbett. Each of those courses include high-quality video lessons, downloadable notation and tab, play-along tracks, and plenty of tunes and songs to play. And the best thing yet is you're going to get your first month free just by being a listener of this show. So go to pegheadnation.com and use promo code pickyfingers at checkout and claim your free month of the best instruction out there. And if you find yourself needing a banjo or accessories to get ready for those Peghead Nation courses, I highly recommend you check out Elderly Instruments, which is the world's most trusted source of new, used, and vintage stringed instruments, including banjos, guitars, violins, mandolins, ukuleles, all that stuff. They're going to have the best instruments you can find anywhere, and we're talking everything from the more affordable instruments for people starting out on up through the most highly sought-after vintage instruments. Elderly Instruments has been family-owned since 1972, and if you can't make it to their Lansing, Michigan showroom, you can see their full selection at elderly.com or give them a call at 517-372-7880 for some professional advice on all of your banjo and other stringed instrument needs. And you know what all these stringed instruments have in common? They all sound better with GHS strings. GHS Strings is another sponsor of the Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast, and I'm proud to say they have been made in Battle Creek, Michigan since 1974. And if you don't want to take my word for it, maybe you'll believe such people as J.D. Crowe, Sonny Osborne, and Bela Fleck, just a few of the many, many users of GHS Strings. So go check them out, ghsstrings.com. They have a wide selection of gauged sets so that no matter what you're looking for, you'll be able to find something there. So I've noticed with your clawhammer playing that you do have a very melodic style of clawhammer. You like doing up-the-neck things. You like doing precise fiddle type of patterns.
Right.
I imagine, not hearing you say that might have actually been influenced backwards from you having learned bluegrass and then applying maybe some of those concepts.
Yeah, it was exactly that. Like, I dropped the clawhammer for a little bit. We played. It was kind of funny. You know, I started playing with these guys, and all of a sudden these gigs started rolling in. We were playing, like, you know, I don't know, 15 weddings in a summer, and like, we had just had like all these gigs. People just seemed to want bluegrass that for whatever reason that particular time that we started playing together. So we were actually like working really hard. They're all kind of crummy gigs, but like it was like, oh my God, you can actually, you know, make some money doing this. We were all packing into a Tacoma. It was like a 2-door Tacoma, and driving like 6 hours to play a gig in Montreal and sleeping in the back of it. And but
so glamorous.
I know. Yeah, it's not that much more glamorous now. But when we started to make a record after playing these gigs, we were like, oh, we should make a CD. And that's when I thought, you know, maybe I could bring some of the old time stuff back into it. And when I started practicing the clawhammer again, there was like this vocabulary that was kind of already there, just sort of naturally fit. And there was a couple of things. I remember like working up Bill Keith's, he has this kind of famous, I mean, there's a lot of famous Bill Keith melodic, Crazy Creek on the clawhammer, and a couple exercises like that, you know, where you're trying to get it note for note.
So you're one of the few people who tend to have like a really high level of both styles. So maybe talk, like you just gave one example of how your bluegrass style playing maybe influenced your old time playing. Are there any more crossover influences that you are able to identify between having worked on both of those so hard? Or what do you see as the balance there?
Like, I mean, I now it's definitely this equal balance. I try very much to try and, you know, treat each one with, you know, a lot of time and, you know, not put one down for too long. There's definitely, I think the clawhammer's been more influenced by the bluegrass playing than vice versa. But there are some things about the bluegrass playing that's like some sort of two-finger style stuff that I like the sound of.
Okay.
That is probably a little more old-timey sounding than a lot of bluegrass players, you know. Also just like arrangement styles, you know, the band I play with, the Slocan Ramblers, a lot of the time we'll just play it sort of in an old-timey way where no one's taking solos. Or if they do take a solo, it's not really like free game to do whatever you want. It's very kind of stick to the melody base, and we just seem to like that sound. And so there's like maybe overarching old-time influences in the bluegrass, but not necessarily as like a specific roll pattern
playing
or
thing.
like that.
Or
Yeah.
whatever. So the Slocan Ramblers, is that this group of friends that you were just describing that started playing and traveling around in the Tacoma?
Yeah, exactly. It snowballed very quickly. We started playing together for fun. Then I think it was like someone asked us to play their like cocktail hour of their wedding, and we got a gig. And then like that, someone saw us at the wedding, and then they asked us and then we had like a full summer of weddings ahead of us. Yeah. And we started playing a weekly gig at a really dive bar in Toronto called the Cloak and Dagger, which we always were joking that like everyone who goes there called it the Puke and Stagger. And it was like, it fit that description very accurately. But it was like also one of those things where people were like yelling and, you know, throwing shot glasses. It was like so rowdy, and like you had to really just power through. And it was almost like kind of like a boot camp for a bluegrass band. Like you just got to like power through this stuff and play loud enough that people can hear you. And we just did the single mic thing, so probably no one could actually hear us in general. But you know, it was like good practice to play as a bluegrass band.
Good boot camp.
It was, yeah.
That's cool.
So after that, then we kind of, I think someone had a connection to a festival in British Columbia. So the concept of like touring nationally was then on the table, which none of us had really played in a group that had done that before. Like a bunch of, like the guitar player was teaching full-time, teaching guitar lessons, and we were all playing in other groups and stuff like that. But then all of a sudden this sort of tour was put on the table, and we're like, oh, maybe we can turn this into something a little more full-time. And then it just really kind of snowballed and started doing our first U.S. dates. And then it's been like a full-time job for the past, 8 years or so.
Early in my childhood days, I dreamed of you as clear as day. But just as dreams come and go, your love and memory fade. If I should never find you beside light, you know my heart will be with the seasons come and seasons go. I would swim the ocean, I would cross the seas to part. I would cross this land of glory just to know I'm in your heart. Through the cold winter, I would scour near and far. I would cross this land of glory just to know I'm in your heart.
Going back to your process of learning the bluegrass banjo, you mentioned that you went for the progressive guys.
Right.
Tell me a few of like who your main influences were, and then also beyond that, when did you see maybe your own style start to develop and emerge out of all this?
Well, so the first CDs I got were probably Bella Fleck, Alison Krauss. I'm trying to think of some like really contemporary stuff, and that was just because I was playing in this band, and I was like, okay, I got to go to the CD store, I got to brush up on some homework, and this is all they had was like it was this stuff. I think it was actually Perpetual Motion, which is Bella Fleck's classical album.
Right.
So it's like not even that applicable to what we were doing, but it was it was better than the sort of archive recordings I had at home of like Fred Cockerham and stuff.
Your parents must have been strangely proud when. Did they ever hear you listening to Perpetual Motion?
They did
recognize some of that stuff.
It was funny. The other funny thing about that was that like they, there's this at that time. I feel like it's more acceptable to do both styles now, but like at that time, it was very much like at these fiddlers conventions there was like no bluegrass. There was a couple. I mean, there's a couple that are famous, like Galac's Fiddlers Convention has always had both, but like Clifftop, there was like one small wing that was they shoved out that was like bluegrassers, and no one would go down there unless you were like it was this deep dark thing that you don't want to. It's like you shouldn't get into that stuff, kid. So then, my parents were like friends after going to this festival a couple of times. They were friends with all these old time people, and so I remember like the first time I was getting into bluegrass, I kind of had to like sort of hide it from them a little bit because they were like very much not indoctrinated, but they were on the old time page along with me, and so it was like this sort of forbidden thing, and I was supposed to keep a secret. But eventually I was playing gigs with this band, so couldn't keep it a secret for too long. But so it was Bella Fleck and. I'm trying to think of who other. I mean, like Bill Keith, basically melodic single string players. The Punch Brothers came to town, and I remember seeing them for the first time, not even knowing who they were. And I went to the show and was completely blown away.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
So I had no idea who Noam McKilney was, and then it was like, oh.
So how'd you make it there? Someone recommended or?
Yeah, someone just said there was a show in town that like there was a banjo player playing at, and I got a ticket. And I got like one of the last tickets. It was sold out at this like rock club that I had never seen a bluegrass band there before, and it was very wild, very eye opening though. Yeah.
And then when did you start to notice like your own style maybe emerge, or what would you say are some elements of your personal style?
It's a tough question. I don't want to like be overly modest or something. I don't know. Like the bluegrass stuff still feels new to me. And so I feel like, I mean, to claim that I have my own bluegrass style is maybe I'm not quite comfortable putting that out there. I don't know. I feel like I'm still a student at it, very much so.
Well, let me phrase it this way. Like, what are some things that you maybe discovered on banjo, or some techniques or tools you use that you feel have really helped your playing, or were like important discoveries and being able to do what you do?
I think I remember going to a workshop actually at one of these festivals and hearing Noam McKilney talk about this sort of concept where he was saying, just to really overgeneralize, but in terms of the bluegrass, like if you wanted to call it like Scruggs style, melodic style, and single string, if you wanted to like break it down into those concepts, obviously that's like brushing over a lot of different styles. If you were to break it down those styles, a lot of players, like if you were to play a record and drop the needle, like you'd kind of be able to tell what style they're playing at any given point in time. So his whole goal was to like be able to drop the needle and not really know what was going on. Like it was some sort of magical blend of all three of those.
In his own playing.
In his own playing. And I remember taking that in and being like, yes, that's, I think, exactly the sound I would love to be. Not claiming to be like I can play like Noam McKilney, but I think that sort of, or, using that concept for other things like, the two-finger style, like Omer Forster is like an amazing two-finger banjo player, one of my favorite banjo players. And he has this record called Flowery Girls, and it's just like really kind of syncopated way of playing the melody. And so sometimes I maybe that's something that I try and like, add in there. If it's like, it just sounds syncopated and it might be single string or it might be kind of just a left-hand pull-offy kind of thing, but hopefully it just is part of the melody at that point.
Not familiar with that person. Is he like a modern player? Or
no, he's not alive anymore. I'm not really actually even sure where he's from. I just know he has this sort of famous album called Flowery Girls that I was given a while ago, and it's again this two-finger style, but a lot of it has this these kind of like left-hand pull-offs which make it syncopated. That's not really the best example of it, but that kind of thing where it's like all of a sudden, even though you're picking the banjo, it still sounds kind of old-timey in a way, And so if we're going to play something like, the Slocan Ramblers play a bunch of like Uncle Dave Macon songs and stuff like that. And so there's like definitely old-timey influences in there. And just playing it straight sort of Scruggs style or something like that just doesn't really fit. Or it kind of like morphs it into this box that it doesn't always... It's not like my favorite sound. So I like adding just some of those kind of two-finger influences or like some kind of clawhammer stuff if you can. I think, I just like the sound of that blended style a little bit.
Yeah, speaking of Canadian banjo players, that's something I really dig about Nick Hornbuckle's playing.
Yeah.
Is that you can, if you squint when you listen to it, you could trick yourself into thinking it's three-finger. You could convince yourself it's clawhammer, and
Yeah.
as it turns out, it's neither because he does that 2-finger thing.
Yeah.
But it really does have that ambiguity to it.
Yeah, and it's this very syncopated feel to it that I love. That's it adds this just bounciness to the fiddle tunes. That he's a great example of it. Also, I mean, it's 3-finger, but another Canadian one is Jason Romero, who kind of has this kind of old timey background, and it really does. It's just a different sound.
Mm-hmm. I already mentioned this a little bit, but now that we're talking about your stylistic approach, something I noticed last night, for example, is that you really have good ability to accurately mimic, say, a fiddle tune. You were playing with your musical partner, Ben Plotnick.
Yeah.
And he's writing these really cool fiddle tunes, but they require a lot of jumps all over the fingerboard, a lot of intricate moves, some often at like really fast speeds.
Yeah.
And so, how do you do that? And
well,
how do you do that?
Man, how do you do that? Oh, man, I'm trying. There's a funny thing. I'll give an example of like some things that had to just be banjoified for me. Like there's this one track we played on this latest record, and it starts with this thing that it's this riff on beats 2, 3, and 4. So it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, and it's sort of a beat on the or a rest on the 1.
And that's how it starts, right? And eventually I remember hearing that one.
And so, I mean, forever I was just thinking, oh, it's a 3-note pattern, and so it, might as well just do it kind of like a forward roll. So I was just trying to play this thing was, and it was not feeling comfortable, and like every time I was doing it was slowing down. And then I realized like I just have to make this more banjo-y. And so instead of doing it, I did like a forward or a square roll, which would be like thumb, index, thumb, middle. Or it would start on the middle. So it'd be middle, thumb, index, thumb, middle, thumb, index, thumb.
Okay.
And if their first note is a rest, you can still kind of continue on with the roll, and it's all of a sudden it was like made this leap, and all of a sudden I could play these things a little more.
You tricked your brain into hearing it as a 4-note pattern, even though one of the notes isn't being played.
Yeah, I kind of had to like hold a fiddle in front of a mirror and pretend it was a banjo or something, like. So there's a couple of things like that, but then also just a kind of melodic style. You just kind of have to work up an arrangement of it and just play it so that it's there, and it's not always there, as I found out last night.
Right. I mean, a lot of times if I'm learning intricate fiddle tunes, I almost look at it as you need to learn it twice. You need to learn the notes, and then you need to learn where on the banjo is the best way for me to play these notes. And there could be like quite a few options.
Yeah.
And the more advanced you get, the more intuitive you get as to like just knowing that, this is going to be the best place for that. But
totally.
It seems like that might be a thing that you've really embraced, I guess.
And I remember doing that early, like I was saying that I got the Perpetual Motion CD.
Yeah.
And so I remember like, okay, one of the first things I did, this is before I could even play like Cripple Creek very well, but I was like, I'm going to learn that Bach partita that he plays, which is the one in E major. You know, he does this thing. It's like...
Yeah.
That sort of thing. So I was like, oh, that sounds like a piece I can work up. It's like totally naive thinking about it and looking back at it. But it's exactly that, where it's kind of soul crushing, because you'll have these phrases that are you're working up, and like you can kind of get them and they're like sort of there, but they just plateau at a certain point, and you have to realize that like you're just playing it the wrong way, and you have to, the notes are there, but it's just not going to be sustainable. So that, you have to like relearn the whole phrase and retrain your brain how to play some of these melodic phrases. And it definitely, it can be a lot of hours.
Yeah. So describe that. So when you are working up one of these fiddle tunes, and it might be really challenging, talk about like the standard that you hold yourself to in executing it cleanly. And maybe is there ever a time where maybe you actually have to like give up on the way that you're playing it and find something different to do?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, in this like project in particular, like there was a couple of things that the fiddle trills that he does that I very much had to give up. So there's one tune that he plays, which is... It's sort of roughly the melody, but he has a trill on... those kind of things.
Thing, yeah.
Very fiddly. And I originally had worked up an arrangement with all of them in there, and we would get together, and it's just not happening up to tempo. And there are obviously, it's not saying that it's impossible in banjo. There's a million banjo players who can do that. Just I had to sort of realize that I was not going to work for me. And so maybe down the line I'll try and add them in. But when I think it's more important to be able to like play it at whatever arrangement you have, at an ability that you're able to sort of, focus on other things rather than just those triplets. Like if that's going to be the forefront of you, or if like you're playing in a nervous setting and you're just worried about getting through those triplets, the rest of it is not going to be good. Like you have to be able to think about like, I want to be able to play this with like these dynamics, and like maybe I can play this phrase a little more legato than this one. Like that's kind of like what I want to get to when I'm performing this stuff, as opposed to like, I hope I'm going to pull this riff off, like
right.
if you're dreading that the whole night, like I've played those shows where you decide you're going to try this riff, and it's in like song 7 of the set, and the whole first set you're just sweating, and of course you're going to mess it up. Like,
yeah, that's a big compromise.
Yeah,
totally. To be able to maybe not still pull off one thing.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Another technique that I saw you using that I really dug is you had this cool like fiddle backup pattern that I don't think I've heard anyone else play that specifically. Do you know what I'm talking about? And are you able to demonstrate it? And that's it.
Yeah, there's like a couple of people who do that. I took a couple lessons with Greg List is his name, banjo player.
My friend Josh Brand is going to be thrilled to hear you say that. Because
Okay.
I was sitting with him and I pointed out, I'm like, I'm going to ask him about that. I really dig that. He's like, sounds kind of like what Greg List does.
Yeah. I mean, when I took lessons off him, he does a whole bunch of other stuff. Like I feel like he uses that in more of like same concept, but like, less of the kind of straight ahead fiddle tune backup and more this, like if you're going to do a halftime breakdown thing. And he like, I have a video of him doing all these different examples of it. And it's just amazing to watch. Like he has like that, these triplets and all these really amazing polyrhythms. Also, his banjo is so it's dark and kind of dead, like there's no overtones on it. So you can kind of get this like, almost like a really dry snare or something like that. Like it works so well for that stuff. Whereas if kind of like the banjo setup I have right now is more like, which is when sometimes you do those kind of things where you're trying to like blend the two with a different setup, then it's like it just sounds a little tinny or something. So I can get away with sometimes.
Play through a pattern of it just so we can get a good like example.
Yeah, so like this song, it's in C sharp minor. And Or sorry, am I playing this? I am playing this in B minor. But it's usually in C sharp minor. And what I'm doing is basically making like a power chord. Mm-hmm. So like, your first finger on the fourth string is your root, and then you kind of have this fifth above it, which is
5 root.
Exactly. Yeah. And you can do this like the actual pattern is thumb. So it's thumb, index, and then a brush with the thumb, and that can be as muted as you want.
Right. And you're actually, I think that's maybe the unique part of it that I haven't seen other people do is like you're actually brushing all 3 strings with that thumb.
Yeah, because I had to do that because Greg Liss has 4 fingers, so he can do the two. He can do the digga 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 digga, and then the with the other 2. Whereas if you don't have,
we should clarify that. He has 4-finger picks.
Yes, exactly. I hope there's no banjo players who've already like chopped off their pinky in order to like make it sound more like Greg List. Yeah. So I mean that is I guess maybe something. But so it's thumb, index, brush, index. Or the more bluegrassy one is thumb, index, brush, index. So the fiddle tune is it is in C sharp minor, right? You can kind of throw like those kind of ideas, It can be kind of a nice like mandolin choppy sort of sound.
Yeah. Do you use that in more general bluegrass settings, or was that something that you just really dug for your duo project?
That was, it was like, it's very naked as we found out last night. You're playing with a whole band and then it's like stripped down to just banjo and fiddle, which is in theory kind of a nice change. But like if you're the people who have to be the banjo and fiddle player, it can be kind of intimidating. Yeah. So, so like, I would do that in order to make it sound more like a full band kind of thing. I think in a bluegrass band, if you have like a mandolin, it might get a little messy. But, sometimes actually if the mandolin player drop or soloing and I'm trying to do a chop, sometimes they're like sometimes for whatever reason, certain songs don't, or like it'll respond better to that sort of thing.
It's just a nice additional tool to have.
Yeah. Totally.
For when it might be.
Yeah.
When it might be cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So this is a bit of a curveball question, but this is the kind of investigative reporting we do here at the Picky Fingers podcast.
With the Picky Fingers team.
Yeah, so this is from one of my confidential sources.
Okay.
I can't say who, but his name might sound like Rashua Jilko. He says that you're a very high-level pool player. So, A, is this true? B, tell me about your billiards resume, and have you done this competitively? And C, what influence does this have on your banjo playing? Okay,
just not admitting to anything, but I will say there is a huge correlation between learning pool and learning music in general. Like there are so many similarities, it's crazy.
Whoa, okay.
Yeah.
Tell me more. This is why I suck so bad at pool.
I got into playing pool because there's a friend of mine, you may know him, his name's Andrew Collins, he's a mandolin player.
I don't know him personally, but I'm aware of him. Yeah, he's a great player.
Yeah, the Andrew Collins Trio, and he used to play in this band, the Foggy Hogtown Boys, which were an amazing Toronto bluegrass band. That's Chris's
Cool's band, right?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And he was a recording engineer. He had this pool table at his house. So I first started playing pool with him, and he was really into it. And I think he had a period of his life where he was way more into it before and had to sort of like, play music or actually, do important things. So he put it down, but he got really back into it when he had the space of the studio. And so he taught me a lot about it. So right from the very get-go of just being kind of like interested in billiards, I had this guy who was really knowledgeable about it and could teach me a lot. So I got quite into it, and he was always asking me, he's like, do you want to come to these tournaments and stuff like that? And I was not good enough yet. But I got really hooked on it, just kind of like the banjo. And there was a pool hall right around the corner from where I was living in Toronto. Okay. And I went and spent 3 hours every morning for like 3 or 4 years, just every morning practicing drills and doing that kind of thing. And I got really hooked on it and like had to like regiment my days so that it was like, I got to cut off my pool practice so I can go practice banjo, and like, it was kind of funny. And then I started playing tournaments, and I haven't won any big tournaments. I won some, tournaments back in Toronto, but it's actually a good pool scene in Toronto. There's a lot of like really competitive players. And I think a lot of people think of like pool halls as being this sort of like dark and dingy, seedy place, but it was mostly like, when you're playing a tournament, most people have earbuds on and they're like wearing, sports wear and stuff like that. It's like not what people
like what you see at poker tournaments now. Everyone has their own fashion thing that they're trying to do.
It's that, except for it's hard to describe. It's even like nerdier in a way. Like it's it's less fashion oriented. The thing I liked about it too, compared to music, was that it was like there's no subjectiveness, or it's just like there's no like, is this like what I want to do, or is this something I'm interested in? It's like you win or you lose, and that's like all there is. And if you lost, it's because you did A and B and C, and like that's where your things broke down. But in terms of the similarity, actually, the funny thing is the way you practice it is like, some of it's like improvising. There's some situations you get yourself in where you just have to kind of be creative in how to get yourself out of it. Some of it is just doing drills. Like sometimes you just set up a certain pattern and you do that until you can do it 10 times in a row perfectly.
Wow.
There's a lot of stuff in like body alignment and all this kind of stuff that translates to how I practice music.
Repetition.
Reps,
yeah, right.
Just general concentration. Like to complete some of these drills, like you have to really concentrate for a long period of time, and it's kind of like playing a gig. Like you can't just like turn off after 3/4 of the gig. Like you still have to have the energy through the whole thing, or else it's just not very good.
Did they have any pool tables at the Cloak and Dagger?
They did. Oh, it was tiny. They couldn't have fit one in there.
Okay.
But yeah, that would have been dangerous.
And you didn't really move to Nashville because you owe people money or anything like that? Like, are you a secret hustler that got...
Exactly. I had to give away some banjos. No, I didn't move to Nashville because I had outstanding debts to pool players. But there's actually a great pool scene here too, and there's a little billiards hall just around the corner that I may have started frequenting now that I've got my 2 doses.
Oh yeah, cool. Back to normal. That's
Except
great.
there's more guns involved with this one.
Oh. Just be careful.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your banjos and your instruments.
Yeah.
Tell me about, so you're a clawhammer and a bluegrass player, so we have double the fun to talk about
right.
here. So tell me what instruments you are using on stage and what you like about each of them, and give us the rundown.
So maybe I'll start with the old time banjo. It's made by Bill Rickard, who's an amazing banjo maker in just north of Toronto. He lives in Aurora, Ontario. And this is a very early one of his, and he's a good friend of Chris Cool's, and Chris Cool introduced us, and he was making these banjos, and he knew that I was kind of getting into it, so I went up there when I was like 12 or 13 or something and got introduced to him. And he was going to make this banjo, which is a white lady, which is exactly what I wanted. It has this cherry wood. It's like kind of reclaimed wood. The sort of story of it was that he knew that I was gearing up to do the clifftop competition that year, and I had like this piece that I was working on, and he was like, "Okay, here's the deal. If you come first in that competition, then like the banjo's on the house." So it was the youth competition, so it wasn't like the all round, but I did win the youth competition. Yeah.
Oh.
So the banjo was on the house, which is amazing.
That is amazing.
So yeah, it's been the one that I've played ever since, and I love it. And it's tweaked it a little bit. I actually got him to build me a new neck. It's got a radius fingerboard, which is kind of not that common for a clawhammer. But and I've been able to set it up in a way that I like it. I actually kind of really have a really small tail piece, which is kind of gives a little more overtone. So if it's really dark, it can be kind of nice. And you can also do this one trick, which is kind of fun.
Yeah, just a no-knot tailpiece. Is that what you call those things? Okay.
This is my new favorite trick, where if you do harmonics on all the strings in open C and then you bend behind the tailpiece, you get a little pedal steel line.
Yeah, I love it.
So that's a great way to add some flashiness to your playing. But it's been this banjo I love ever since I've had it, and I haven't really. I've played other banjos and I like them, but it's just sort of this thing that you kind of get used to it, and it's sort of got a story behind it, and so
he's a lot of sentimental value to it and everything too.
Yeah. He's actually in the process of making me another one right now as we speak. That'll be a tubaphone, but it's going to be kind of similar to this. It's a shorter neck scale and a couple of things that just make it sort of really easy to play, I find. Yeah, that's the clawhammer one.
So actually, before you move on, bluegrass listeners probably are not accustomed to having different choices for tone rings. So you mentioned the White Lady. If my memory is right, that's a bit more of like a brighter, crisper kind of sound.
Yeah, exactly.
Or what would you say? And then the tubaphone that you're having done is a kind of what it sounds like, a more resonant sound. Would you agree with those, or what?
Yeah, the funny thing is that like tubaphones I actually find a little bit often quieter, which is not what they're known for. In my experience, they're a little bit quieter, but they are like the sustain on them is a little longer and the sort of dark end is a little sort of smoother. But yeah, you're totally right in that the White Lady is kind of a little brighter, a little crisper.
Okay.
And again, I always find like, banjos are a little bit like bicycles in that you can sort of like swap out parts and really...
Oh, big time,
as opposed to like a violin, which is obviously you can tune it or like you can sort of tweak things so that it sounds as good as it possibly can, but it's like not as interchangeable as a banjo.
It's going to be what it is. Yeah. Same. Yeah, with a guitar or mandolin too.
Yeah, exactly. Right? So banjos you can sort of customize a little more. So this one I've done a couple of things, but really not a whole lot. I just really like how it sounds. But yeah, it has this kind of crisp like those. The one thing I do like is those left hand pull offs really pop out. You can kind of hear every note if you're playing fiddle tune stuff.
Sounds wonderful.
It pops out.
Have you, by any chance, played that? I've lusted a little bit online about that resophonic banjo that he makes. Have you played one of those?
I have. I did the demo for the product on his website.
I've probably watched it and forgot. Okay.
Yeah. It's really cool. I just made a record with the Slocan Ramblers, and we play a Tom Petty song where I'm playing slide banjo on it, and I tried really hard to get my hands on one of those, but they're sold out. He's like, they're so popular, he can't keep one in the shop. So
yeah, they look amazing.
Yeah, they're really fun. If you ever get a chance to play one, actually, so the new banjo he's building, not to go down too far down that road, is exactly the same neck they use on those banjos.
Okay,
it's a really, really comfortable neck.
Shorter scale, you said?
It's a shorter scale.
Like how short are we talking? Like 20? Is it like an A scale?
I couldn't even. I'm so bad with this stuff.
Okay.
I really like. I play it and I like it or I don't. But I don't really keep track of this stuff. I should know. I know that the long scale that he usually uses like 26 something.
Probably 26 and a quarter. Often they're like 25 and a half when they're like
shorter scale. Yeah,
3/4 of an inch shorter.
Okay. Yeah. That sounds, those numbers.
Not huge, but enough.
Heard those numbers in my lifetime at some point.
Right, they're numbers. They're numbers that I know.
I've counted that high before. So that's this banjo, and yes, those resophonic banjos are amazing.
Oh, I'd love to try one.
Yeah. And then the bluegrass one. The bluegrass one I played for a long time was one of these gold tone banjos, and it was like, I can't remember the model, but it served me really well for a long time.
Yeah,
they're great banjos. I always suggest them for people who are like kind of getting just into the banjo. Like if you want to step up from the good times or whatever those ones are called, which are like $300 or $400 banjos. It's like maybe more. It's maybe another $300 or $400, maybe $1,000 in total. Yeah. But it's a really great banjo. Yeah, I'm not sponsored by Gold Tone, so
I worked at Elderly for quite a long time. I sold tons of those things. So I totally agree.
Yeah, great. So I played that forever, and then there was a friend who's a banjo player in Ottawa, and he was saying, you should get a better banjo, and at the time the few weddings that we were playing with the Slocans wasn't really adding up to a budget of like a 5-string master tone or anything like that. So I was kind of saying, maybe now's not the time. Maybe if I, get a real job or something like that, I can do it. And then so eventually he sent me an email. He's like, I got this banjo, and maybe you want to play it, and like if you can't afford it right now, maybe pay it off over time, which was really extremely generous of him. So he actually found this Calcroyd, and it's a Style 10.
Style 10, okay.
Yeah, so it has this, what they call the mother of toilet seat on the back.
Of course.
Which is the kind of characteristic. I don't really know the whole story behind those. I mean, I imagine it's sort of some of the cuts of wood that were not, super desirable or didn't look amazing or maybe had a knot in it, so they used them for these. But it's all the old sort of Gibson parts and stuff like that.
Right.
But again, I'm not really, I'm not super knowledgeable about the banjo parts and the history. And I've tried to do my best to sort of follow along with the Gibson history, but I'd rather spend my time playing pool
Right.
and banjos.
So but that's not an original neck on it, obviously. Where did that come from?
Yeah, so it originally actually came with, there's one sitting over there. That was made by Robin Smith, and that, is painted black and supposed to sort of fit this thing. And it just, same with my clawhammer banjo. I really love very deep and kind of wide neck, something, people describe as like a baseball bat sort of thing.
Yeah.
For some reason, when it's too skinny, it sort of like disintegrates in your hand, or like the pull-offs just feel, I don't know, they don't feel right. So I bought this neck off a friend of mine who's an amazing banjo player. Another shout out to another Canadian banjo player named Craig Korth. And
I've met Craig.
Yeah, the nicest guy in the world.
And
he has a sort of a stockpile of cool stuff. So he had this neck that was sitting around, and I think it's a Bella copy, but it's made by Greg Rich. Okay. And so I just sort of put this one. Actually, Bill Rickard put it on for me. And I've been playing. It actually did darken up the instrument a little bit. But I think I'm going through this constant struggle that all bluegrass banjos are playing, where it's like you like it dark for certain tunes, and then the bluegrass tune comes along, and you're like, I wish it was brighter.
Yeah.
So I have it sort of set a little brightly now. That sort of, that punch kind of.
Yeah. The tailpiece on that is really unique. I don't think I've seen that before. What is that?
Yeah, this, I usually have a standard like Presto tailpiece on here, but this is the new Bill Rickard prototype tailpiece that he's coming out with, and actually it's really cool. So there's a couple things about it, and I'll try and describe it. So it's got these standard hooks that you feed the strings through normally just to sort of guide them through, and I think it adds the kind of correct breaking angle for the strings behind the bridge. But the nice thing about it is that you can actually use those hooks to add the loop end strings there. So if you want to actually lower the tension of your strings, which I did for a while, it's really nice. Or if you want high gauge strings, the sound of high gauge strings, but lower tension, like it kind of adds this whole other thing you can play around with. Not that banjo players need more things to tinker with, but
but it's there.
It's there if you want it. The other nice thing about it is that he's designed it so that the balls on where you normally the loop end goes, you can actually use ball end guitar strings if you're in a pinch, or if you like. Actually, on my clawhammer banjo, I often use just single guitar strings because I can't buy a set that's heavy enough. So there's a couple of really cool things about it. It also I think it sounds great. And I'm not sure if they're for sale on his website yet, but they're coming.
But it's a Rickard tailpiece.
Rickard tailpiece, yeah.
Excellent. What about your other pieces there? The bridge, and I noticed that's a Snuffy Smith head, which, if I'm not mistaken, are those not available anymore?
They're not. I actually found this in a used banjo shop, and it was $5. And I was like, I'll take that one. I'll take it right now.
Is new?
No, it was used.
Oh, okay.
They had like a box of like used banjo heads.
Interesting.
And they were like, I think they would often, when they were selling used banjos, they would just like take it apart and put their standard whatever setup on it. And so they had a box of these ones, and I saw this, and I've played them on a couple of different banjos, and they sound amazing. I love them.
Yeah,
I remember kind of perfect balance of like,
I've used one, but I almost forgot that they were a thing because I haven't seen them in quite some time.
Yeah, I'm not really sure. Like, I know Huber makes banjo heads that have like an extra layer of frosting or something like that, but they're not like the 5-star super heavy ones.
Yeah.
So this is, again, somewhere in the sort of middle ground.
Similar to that. A little bit, yeah.
I liked it. I haven't really changed it in a while, so maybe I can play around with other things, but I'm kind of happy with how it's sounding these days. There was definitely last night when I was playing with some of the fiddle tunes that were a little bit, minor and darker. I kind of wished, I had more of this like lower bassiness or something to it, but whatever, it is what it is.
How about that bridge?
Oh yeah, the bridge is it's again a Rickard bridge. It's sort of an experimental thing that he's doing. So he drills a hole in the middle of the middle bridge.
I saw that.
It's like
is there a purpose to that, or that's just like his brand thing?
Well, I mean, I think he was basing it roughly off, like violin bridges have holes in it. It's sort of designed to direct the sound in different ways. And so I think he was just kind of experimenting with that. And it's just, I tried a million out at a shop, and this one just sounded good and it fit. Yeah. So like I've just been using it. But bridges are something, I don't really tinker with this instrument too much, but bridges are the one thing I'll do. Like I swap out the bridge every, couple of days just to try something new.
Yeah, they're fun.
Seems to be like an obsession or something. I don't know.
I noticed last night you had your own like microphone set up too. So take us through what you prefer for that and what your like live performance or
right. It sort of depends on the show that you're playing. my live setup is based basically on what I've done with the Slocan Ramblers, and we had a couple of tours where we're opening up maybe a band that you know of. They're called The Last Revel, and
Yeah.
they're
Where do I know that from?
They're from Michigan, but they played in sort of like a rock venue type concert tour. So we were opening up for them for a whole tour, and it was like, playing with sensitive condenser mics was just not going to really be a good idea. So we got this set up. So I've been using this Felix preamp, which is great. And then, when we play, and then we kind of got like hooked on using these things because it just like makes your sound check so much faster. And they sound great. I mean, a microphone, in my opinion, sounds better. There's like more air in between the instrument and you can step away from it. But, like kind of a halfway point that we've been able to do is they have 2 inputs on them. So you can actually set up a microphone on a stand, and then you can also like plug something in. Like I plug a little condenser gooseneck microphone in the banjo, and that way you can have like a base level of instrument volume, or if like the sound tech needs a little bit more, you can kind of give more of that, but you can also step into a microphone.
Yeah, to give a boost effect.
Yeah, and there's just like this something about the air in between the microphone that you just don't get when the clip-on microphone or the pickup is right there. So something that you can't really replicate.
So 2 microphones, that's interesting. I think usually people would, do the pickup and mic combo, but you're actually doing two actual microphones.
Yeah, I mean, the pickup, there are some times I did a tour where it was like super loud venues and stuff like that I actually had to swap out and use a pickup because it's just like it wasn't cutting it.
You had to.
But most of the time I can get away with a condenser microphone, and like the occasional time you'll have to like mess around with the phase so that they're not out of phase. Yeah. But I mean, a lot of people were like warning me about that there's going to be phase issues and like that's not going to work. And for the most part, it's just been totally fine the whole time. So I don't know. I'm not like advertising that this is the best setup in the world, but it's kind of been working for me. And
what kind of mics are those?
I just use, I played around with a couple ones. The mic on the stand is a Neumann KM184. I also really like, there's this cheaper mic called by AKG, the C535, which is like not that expensive. I don't think they make them anymore, so they might be getting more expensive to try and find them used, but it sounds great on the banjo. It's like really crispy and really, like if you want to play kind of bluegrass with like it grabs the snappy pull-offs really well. So that's kind of a fun microphone to use on a stand. But then, I played with a DPA, and those are great, but like I just can't get as much volume as like a Audio Technica thing or something like that. So I've used mostly the Audio Technica ones, and I have occasionally, if the sound tech has one, they'll like give me one of the Shure clip-on things, and those are fine too, but yeah, mostly just the Audio Technica clip-on thing. And you can install it right, like directly in the banjo. I've done before. If you need it to be really loud, I'll just, open up the back and install the clip-on microphone inside the banjo, and you can get it really loud.
Yeah, even in those rock clubs.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Anything else we forgot to cover about your setup or anything really?
I mean, I think that I'm sure there's other banjo players on this podcast who would have more insight on what setup is or how it's different or unique. So I think we've covered it all to answer the question.
Excellent. Do you have your own personal website, and how do people find your music and your tour dates, if those ever happen?
So my personal website is frankevansmusic.ca or .com, sorry. It used to be .ca, but now I live in Nashville here. I had to change that.
Plus you're in witness protection from the pool hall incident that
That's right. Good thing that the .com was the last bit of protection I needed. And then also I play with the Slocan Ramblers, which is www.slocanramblers.com. And those, those have my tour dates. Those are the only people I tour with. I've been playing a little bit with George Jackson as I've been down here. He's an amazing old-time fiddle player and bluegrass fiddle player. So he has a new record coming out that I'll be playing on, and just hopefully when things open up, I'll have more to share.
And listeners know George as childhood friend of BB Bowness from New Zealand, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so if that name sounds familiar, that's where we know it from.
In fact, she's on that record as well. So,
is she?
Yeah, it was a high standard to be following next to.
He obviously has very good tastes for his
international banjo players.
Exactly. All right, well, thanks a bunch. We should, I don't know if we ever specifically plugged the duo project.
Sure,
we referred to it a lot. But,
right, so I just put out a record with my dear friend Ben Plotnick, and we recorded 11 tracks of original banjo and fiddle duets. And this is sort of the concert we keep referring to. Last night as we did our CD release at the station in here in Nashville, and had an amazing band with us, and played this stuff that was tricky, but we were having a good time with it. So if you want to check out some original banjo and fiddle music, you can go to Ben Plotnick's website. And I actually don't have that information on me right now.
Okay.
But if you just search Ben Plotnick, his website will come up. And
I'll put a link in the
show notes
Great. Here. So yeah, they are very cool tunes. They should check it out. And the show was awesome. I appreciate you inviting me to that.
Oh, I'm glad you showed up. Yeah, it was fun.
All right. Well, thanks for having me, and great chatting with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm a huge fan of the podcast.
Thanks, everyone, so much for listening. You heard a bunch of sound clips in this episode, and in order, they were Down in the Sugar Bush by the Slocan Ramblers, The Farewell Medley by the Lonesome Ace String Band, Banjonique by Walt Koken, Just to Know by the Slocan Ramblers, and then 2 tracks off of that new fiddle and banjo duo album with Ben Plotnick. Those were The Ballad of John Mack and Riverbend Marshes. Thank you once again to Jordan Ream, today's Patreon supporter of the show. You can go to patreon.com/banjopodcast to become a supporter yourself. And of course, any of you VIPs out there, don't forget the VIP Lounge meet and greet this upcoming September 26th at 1 p.m. That's a Sunday, and that's 1 p.m. Eastern time for all of you other time zoners. I think that's going to do it for me. Contact the show, pickyfingersbanjopodcast@gmail.com, and I'll see y'all next time.